Rock and roll. Here we go.
Episode 281, November 13th, 2023. I'm John Najarian. He is Pete Najarian, and Jared is in the ether out there somewhere.
It's a good spot,
Jared. Yeah, it's a good spot for him to be hovering. Awesome. Well, we're going to talk about macro minutes, some fantastic futures, a bunch of stocks, and believe it or not, the sports are even more interesting again this week, Pete, than probably all of that. But Let's get started with the Rebel's Edge. The Rebel's Edge today, we're kicking it off with macro minute. Moody's turns negative on the U.S. credit rating. But it's not the same as a downgrade, folks. They're just negative on it.
Well, I'm going to highlight, John, the consumer spending numbers. They fell in October, and they're primarily, it's something you and I have talked about. I was talking about with Maria Bartiromo just the other day. It's the weakness in electronics, in appliances, in furniture, in home stores. People are going for the experience. They're not going for the bulk. They're not going for, everything that I just mentioned. So it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. But right now, the experience is winning out. We saw some of that just based upon what we saw from Disney's earnings just last week.
Yeah, I love that they say he got his mojo back, Pete. They said, Iger brings Disney's mojo back. And I kind of sit there questioning like this, thinking, wow, he cut $7 billion in spending, and that's the Disney mojo. You can only do that a couple times, folks. It's not like
$7.5 billion. $7.5 billion.
Back. They can cut another $7.5 billion. That's not really the way things work if you're doing a great job, which he clearly is not. But let's talk about fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
Well, we have a number of folks, Pete, lining up saying that the Federal Reserve, their efforts to curb inflation are going to trigger a downturn. We've got Stevie Cohen, we've got JP Morgan, we've got a host of folks, and now we've got a bunch of the private equity guys saying that it's going to be, quote, very, very difficult for this to be a soft landing with as much interest rate hikes as the Fed has thrown at us and kept, after two pauses, kept at these levels.
John, I'm going to go right back to volatility again because of the fact that we started to get a little bit of a pop last week, and it was gone as fast as it came in. And we're looking at a volatility index right now in the 14s. It's up 4%. It's still in the 14s today. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of what's going on right now. It's interesting to watch. I think that's why we're seeing the kind of volumes, John, that we are seeing right now in the derivatives markets, not just the S&P 500, but I'm talking about the derivatives themselves, the option markets everywhere. We traded over 50 million contracts again this past Friday. Now, that was going into a Veterans Day weekend and all that type of thing and everything that is involved. And yet we still had that kind of volume. So absolutely incredible to me. And I'll tell you, it's because volatility is no longer up at that 23 level. People were kind of hands off. They are hands on right now with the volatility under 15.
Yeah, and they should be, Pete, because we've seen swings go from 200 up, 200 down, or 200 down to 200 up. We've seen it both ways. Today it wasn't 200, it was like 60 to the downside. Now we're 60 to the upside. So that's kind of the way the futures and volatility are moving. Yeah. Let's talk about Monday, Pete, MNDY. This one reported Q3 earnings. The top line and bottom line both beat. And this is a software maker. I know it sounds like they'd be, I think you're thinking probably, Pete, of Tuesdays.com or Tuesday Morning or something like that. That's a retailer, a discount retailer. But this is a software company. And their guidance was also pretty good.
Yeah, John, the numbers across the board, you look at the balance sheet even before you get to those numbers and you say, looks pretty damn good. You look at the free cash flow, 131 million bucks. That looks pretty daggone good. Then you get the kind of looking forward that they are doing right now. And you see that and you look at that guidance and you say, you know what? They had a good quarter and they are guiding as well to the upside. All of that gives it a nice big move. Last I looked, it was up about 11%. Could be different now, I'm sure. Heavy volume it just shows you a lot of people are kind of trying to chase this one, John, now that they've come out and they've given you that great guidance.
Yeah, and that's what it takes. If you've got great guidance, people are looking for anything that gives them a clue to what 2024 might be looking like. The end of 2023 right now is there before us, and then the beginning of 2024. That's what they're looking for. So, like you say, Pete, up about 11% and doing in the neighborhood of 4x its normal volume already today. All right, let's talk about a therapeutic company, Pete, that was down 30%, then 40. Now I think it's down 45%. VERV, VERV. They were working on something, Pete, about, I think this has something to do with hypocholesterol. In other words, very high levels of cholesterol. How can you bring that back down? Well, these guys had a phase trial that they were working on bringing it down, but apparently not bringing it down enough.
Well, it's even a little bit worse than that, John, because they were able to bring down for quite a few folks. They did a great job. Problem is they had two, and it wasn't a huge study, but they had two, one who had a heart attack and a second guy that died. So that, I think, is the biggest problem that these guys face. And when you look at everything about this company, started the year over $20. It was $9 not too terribly long ago today, but it just can, as you just pointed out, it just keeps going lower. The problem is they don't have a huge pipeline, and right now they're just struggling along trying to get this thing advanced. Now, some of the numbers looked pretty good, and the CEO was trying to point that out because the majority did okay, and they were able to do some of the things that they were looking for with cholesterol. The problem is those other two that I mentioned, when you've got something like that, the severity of death, that's never a good thing as you're trying to get your drug moving to the next level and the next level and the clinicals and everything else.
Yep. And having enough money to support all of that puts a lot of companies at risk of being taken out for not a big premium, but rather taken under, sort of. Yep. All right. Let's talk about Tower Semiconductor, Pete, because this one, Israeli company, down today. They forecast a decline in quarterly revenue. So that would be the guidance. And there's an awful lot of chips on the market right now, and people are having to cut price because, as we know, supply and demand still works, folks. So if you have too much supply, prices going down. People are basically thinking that's what's playing out for Tower Semiconductor and why it's down today.
Well, it was down and it's been moving around, John. I mean, it's an interesting thing because it was getting hit. Last I looked, it actually moved up a little bit. It was up maybe 1%. And I think part of that was the earnings itself were pretty good. Now, you mentioned the revenue. You're exactly right. And there was a glut. That's exactly right. A lot of these just chip makers are running into that. But I think the other thing that we all have in the backdrop right now, for them at least, is Intel was trying to acquire these guys. So there's a lot to be said for that. And maybe at these levels, John, just maybe at these levels, that might be something where Intel comes back and goes, well, you know what? We're kind of liking where you are now versus where you were before. Maybe now is the time. We'll see how that plays out. But certainly it's going to be an interesting ride. This is a stock that year to date, it was $44. Now it's trading closer to $24. And that's a pretty decent discount. And maybe that's going to be appetizing for somebody like Intel or somebody else.
It sure could be. And, if you've already gone through their books once or tried to and had your folks analyze what the crossover would be and so forth, maybe this is the shot, Pete, that they say, we could offer them a nice premium and take them out in the low 30s rather than when it was up there in the 40s last time. All right, let's talk about Boeing, because big Dubai Air Show. And used to be that the Paris Air Show, Pete, was the biggest, and it may still be the granddaddy of them all in terms of, not in terms of, flight demonstration of, the Blue Angels and things like that, but instead of new aircraft, new helicopters, all the different things, drones even show up at these things, UAVs. But Boeing got two big orders. The one from Emirates was massive, and that's why Boeing was popping in the pre-market. And let's see, they Fly Dubai ordered 30 of their 787 Dreamliners, but Emirates ordered 95 aircraft, and that's the one that's really driving Boeing, pushed it back up through 200.
And that aircraft, John, we're talking about real money here. We're talking about $52 billion worth of airplanes. I mean, it's absolutely an amazing number. Now, this is a company, Boeing, that their last earnings, not so great. The stock actually went down. It was trading 177. End of October is when that was occurring. Take a look at it now. How you like me now? Trading at 205. This is a stock that has absolutely made an incredible turn, and it's catalysts like this that give that kind of a turn. As you mentioned, 95, 100 aircraft, whatever it is, but those 777X wide bodies, that's the big boys. And when you're in the big boy club and they want that kind of an order, I think Boeing's looking awfully good today and probably into the future based upon these kind of orders that they got today.
This was one of those red letter days for Boeing, Pete. Now, their competitor, Airbus, got a whole bunch of orders too, but Airbus has been not doing any better than Boeing in terms of, how the stocks perform and things like that, Pete. But Boeing certainly seems to be on an upswing right now. We'll see if they can hold on to that momentum.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and the stock is performing very nicely right now. And you know what, John? Maybe it's too cheap, honestly. I mean, looking at Boeing and looking what they were able to do there, it might be a little bit too cheap right now as a company based upon what we're seeing right now in front of us following that show.
Well, now tell me what you think about Jim Harbaugh going over to the Raiders, Pete. Because I'm waiting for that headline to come across.
And it's a possibility. We've all talked about this for multiple years. Jim constantly is a guy who was in the NFL, 49ers, and had that opportunity. And now he's back at his alma mater. I played against Jim in college. He and I are about the same age. He played at Michigan. He was a quarterback. The guy, I think the world of him as a player, John, as a coach. I love the fact that he's old school. He learned from Bo Schembechler. The way he runs that offense, he brings in extra tight ends and extra offensive linemen to play tight ends. And it's old school, knock you in the face football. Now, he's had a few issues this year, right? I mean, he was suspended the first 3 games. He could be at practice, but he was suspended from those games for recruiting violations. Now, he's got the issues where it's sportsmanship policy is the way they're framing this now for sign stealing. Personally, I think the whole sign stealing thing is the most ridiculously stupid thing in the world. That being said, there is rules about the sportsmanship side of things, right? Well, here's how you fix it. You know how you fix it, John? You say to the University of Michigan, hey, Jim, how much do you make a year? Well, he's making around 10 million. All right, Jim, we want 5 million from you, and we're going to go after the university for the TV money that you guys are getting. Because unless you want this to happen again, and if they do that, John, there will never be a case of sign stealing ever again. Because the only thing that hurts these universities and the coaches is their pocketbook. They don't want somebody reaching in their pocketbook. And I'm not saying this as a guy trying to bash Michigan. I actually think the world of what they've been able to accomplish there, what Jim's done, and I don't think he's gotten any advantage at all. By the way, this past weekend when they beat Penn State again, which they always beat Penn State, when they did it, how did they do it? Well, they ran the same play maybe 20 times. I don't think they needed signs to get out there and say, we're giving the ball to the running back Corum, try to stop us. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I don't think they got any advantage from it, but nonetheless, if people want to have the sportsmanship policies that they've got, I think they've got to hit them where it hurts. How about you? Is that too harsh? Because something has to happen, in my opinion. But what do you think, John?
Well, first of all, Pete, college should have the same thing that the pros have. They should give them the ability to have the communication in the helmet, coach to the quarterback in the helmet. Then it doesn't matter what the signs are. You could just be goofing around with the signs because a lot of these things look pretty stupid anyway. They'll hold up a chicken, they'll hold up a zero, they'll hold up a spade from a deck of cards or whatever. And you got to look at those 3 and then know what they're actually telling you. What is the play? Because that's the signs that we're talking about here. what are they stealing? They're not stealing the defensive signals because, again, the defense shifts based on where the offense is moving, even if they've got a defense called already. But I would say, Pete, that I was looking around earlier at Jimbo Fisher because, of course, Jimbo Fisher, he's paying he's getting paid bigly because they recruited him out of Florida State, brought him into Texas A&M, and now they're saying it's going to cost him about $100 million to get rid of him because they fired him. They're going to get rid of all of his assistant coaches. They have to pay him out on their contracts, and then they have to find somebody else that will be willing to coach for $10 million a year or whatever the number is. So, yeah, you're right. Hitting them in the pocketbook would hurt. The sign stealing, though, I looked it up as far as when was it first reported, Pete? And as you accurately said, that was not the reason he was suspended for the first 3 games. I think that was either practices, Pete, or something else, but it had nothing to do with sign stealing. But teams have known, or, how could they not know? Because you and I know just from watching the news that this sign stealing thing's been around since September. So, maybe the 3rd week in September, people were accusing Stallions of doing this with various, moles or whatever the hell you'd call them, spies doing this. And when I look at that, I think, okay, so what coach wouldn't have started changing their signals up every week based on that? Do you really have to keep them the same all year? I mean, again, they can be somewhat complicated. You're holding up a sign like this, then you hold it up upside down. They can have different meanings. I get it. But I think it's just dumb to think that the other coaches hadn't already reacted to the idea that, oh, we're going to be playing Michigan in the future. We better change those signals because he probably stole them. Now, you're hitting the crux of the matter, though, with the penalties. And that's always what hurts. You take the TV money away from Michigan for, the whole season, take the Big Ten money away from him for the season. They will never do that again. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I love Jim, and I think he will potentially be at the Raiders, John, or somewhere in the NFL next year.
If
I think
Dion isn't there first.
I think he's tired of the college system and all the headaches that he's had to deal with over the years. Anyway, next on, John, how about we're going to go somewhere where we already touched this last week and now the rest of the world figured it out. CJ Stroud, pretty damn good quarterback, pretty damn good pick in the NFL draft this past year. The guy's only got 15 touchdowns and, count them, 2 interceptions. These other veteran quarterbacks, all they do is throw interceptions. Everywhere you look, you see these guys. Some of them are just absolutely terrible. And you just kind of shake your head going, how did these guys get the reputations they get, the salaries they get? And yet you've got a guy like CJ Stroud, first year, just came out of Ohio State, and he's got the team into position, John. They're 5-4 now. He's done a great job. They beat Cincinnati just yesterday. They've done everything that you'd be looking for a team to do in terms of what they did in the draft, what they did in free agency, and how they prepared themselves for what they're doing right now. By the way, a Golden Gopher linebacker, a friend of mine, is their starting linebacker who leads their team in tackles as well. Go Gophers. Got to love it. All right, so
take a look at the video. Let the video say it for you.
Let's see it.
Okay, so here's number 7, CJ Stroud, folks. And watch how this guy comports himself. Watch how he evades tacklers and, gets the ball downfield still, because he's having to, it's not exactly being bum rushed, but there's a lot of rushing coming at him there.
Yeah.
And he has to step away from it, right, Pete? And still find a receiver.
Well, the key.
Oh, yeah. This is by the lefttake.com. That's where we got this this video from, folks. But, whether it's his tight ends, the wide receivers, look at these plays, Pete, just over and over again. And they know he has to throw. And right now he has to get them in position to get the game-winning field goal.
Yep, he did a magnificent job. He looks like a guy who's been in the NFL for 5 or 6 years and learned underneath somebody and then got his chance, and he's done really well. That's not the case. This is his first year in the NFL. This is his 9th game. I mean, the guy's done an absolutely amazing job. And the way he moves in the pocket, and to your point, he's looking downfield. And that's what you do as a quarterback. The good quarterbacks do that. They scramble around. They might have pressure, or maybe they're just looking for an opening, but they scramble around, find that opening. And every once in a while, sure, you tuck it and you run with the ball, but you're always looking downfield. And I think that's what makes this guy so special. I got a chance to watch him in college. And let me tell you something. You could tell he was special when he showed up at Ohio State. The guy was absolutely incredible. But, you know, he's not the only one, John. How about the Vikings? We've got Rocket Man on the Vikings. I mean, Josh Dobbs, the guy is literally, an aerospace engineer. I mean, it's unbelievable. And he's come in, and you don't want to get too far in front of yourself. But in game one, he was pretty amazing because he'd been there 3 days and he wasn't scheduled to start. The guy in front of him got hurt. He got the job. Now with this second game, he gets the job again and absolutely destroys the New Orleans Saints. He just goes up and down the field, running with the ball. He's a big, lean guy, but he's 6'3" or 4", he's about 210 pounds. He runs well, John. He finds himself he's always looking downfield as well, but he's a very good decision maker so far with the Vikings. This is only 2 games. We don't want to jump in front of ourselves because he's been there 4 years. This is only his second game with the Vikings. Before that, he had some struggles here and there, but so far, so good. I'm going to give you one last one too, John. How about Dak Prescott? How's that guy doing so far with the Dallas Cowboys? He looked terrible early on. He wasn't a guy that people were very happy with if you're a Dallas fan, but they've won 4 of the last 6 games. And in the last 4 games, he's got 12 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. So I would say he has bounced back. He also has gotten more help from his offensive line. And I think those receivers all getting healthy, tight ends all getting healthy, and a running back that actually can run the ball pretty well. I think that makes the Dallas Cowboys a pretty difficult team, including right where they are with the Philadelphia Eagles, John.
Oh, yeah. I think if you were lucky enough to get them when they were a little banged up on the offensive line and stuff, good for you. It might not be so lucky this time around, Pete, because that Dallas line was giving him time, and they were just punishing. You know, the running backs, Pollard was just ripping off yards against the horrible Giants. But, man, he's thrown for 17 touchdowns this year, Pete. Dak is not the bad Dak that we've seen in the past. Now, just like you said with Dobbs, though, I'm not waving the flag and putting out the bunting, saying that, oh, he's the Super Bowl champ now. He's a sure thing MVP. No, not saying that. He could slip back into being the old Dak. But as long as he's got Lamb out there, Pete, and his tight end Ferguson and some of the other guys that he's been connecting with on a regular basis, he looks like he's having fun. He doesn't look like a guy under pressure. And that's a big difference from when you saw him in some of the games that he struggled with this year, when he looked like he was either A, running for his life, or B, just frustrated and making bad decisions. He looks like he's making good decisions to me.
And he looks like he's having fun. And the relationship, it looks like, John, with he and McCarthy, the head coach, it looks solid. Those guys are on the sidelines talking, hugging, talking about the game itself, going back and forth. And you could tell there's a camaraderie there of that team. And if Dak can keep this up, John, they get pretty scary in a hurry, because we all know you also got Parsons on the other side. You got a good defense as well. So I think the Dallas Cowboys, if Dak can be the Dak that he's been in the last 3, 4, 5 games, this is a team that's going to be very, very interesting and deep into the playoffs, I would think. But can they win the division? Maybe. Philadelphia is still pretty damn good, too.
Yeah, Philadelphia's not slacking off at all. And the Ravens, that's a tough team, but they had a tough week. But the Ravens are somebody everybody has to go through them too, Pete.
They're unreal. And I'll tell you what, let's not look past Cleveland either. Cleveland, who just beat Baltimore. Cleveland's got a defense like I haven't seen in a while. I mean, they're better, I think, than the Baltimore defense. I think those guys, they're so impressive. Now, offensively, they're pretty damn good. They're not great, but they're pretty damn good. So that's why I think their record is what it is. But if they can catch any kind of fire on the offensive side, and Stefanski's that kind of a guy, this could be a pretty interesting team as well.
Yeah. And so, like you just described, you've got a bunch of great NFC teams, Detroit, San Francisco. I can't throw the Vikings out of it, Pete.
No.
The Vikings, the Cowboys, and the Eagles, of course. And then you've got the AFC, where I don't think they have quite as many teams that are as good as the teams we just named, but they've still got Kansas City. They've still got a lot of juice when it comes to great offenses in the AFC.
Yep, for sure.
Well, that's going to do it for us today, folks. Thanks for joining us. Remember, we will be.
It's almost like that background on my screen, Pete.
And Pete and I will be
probably
back
about
with
50 people
the
in the
Rebels Edge
airplane
at 1
lounge
p.m.
right
Eastern
now, airline
tomorrow.
lounge.
See you then.